So there I was, working my average shift at my 9 to 5 job, serving food at Burger King, just having a typical day at work. But you want to know what I was thinking to myself? Man, I sure have made quite a few videos on Nintendo, and I publicly stated my love and criticisms for the company, but I don't even know the origins of it or how it even began. And of course, I've heard before that they used to sell like toys or cards or something along those lines, but I didn't know Nintendo's proper origin story. So of course, me being the slave of YouTube I am, I thought to myself, hey, we should make a video about that. So I'm going to give you, the lovely viewer, a free ticket to the late 80s and go into detail about the birth of Nintendo. The year is 1889, and a craftsman by the name of Fusajiro Yamauchi decided to found a company by the name of Nintendo Karuta in Japan, whose sole aim was to produce and distribute a type of Japanese variety cards called Hanafuda. Funnily enough, the name Nintendo is commonly interpreted as the phrase leave luck to heaven, or even leave fate to heaven. But according to the wiki, this phrase doesn't have any real historical validation and can be also translated as the Temple of Hanafuda, which makes more sense since the company's sole product at the time was Hanafuda cards. But if you continue down Nintendo's history as a card company, I honestly think the first interpretation is way more interesting. But to fully understand where I'm going with this, allow me to briefly break down the kanji characters used in the name Nintendo, specifically the kanji characters for the 10 in Nintendo, because 10 by itself is just defined as heaven, but it also clearly shares the same kanji characters as the name of the mythical being Tengu, who is known in Japan as a symbol of playing cards and illegal gambling, who is often depicted with a large nose. Now look, I obviously ain't no detective or anything, but I can't deny the obvious parallels to Nintendo's biggest cash cow over here with the big nose and mustache. Just giving you something to think about. However, the parallel goes even deeper because according to the history of Nintendo, those visiting the pleasure quarters of Osaka and Kyoto would rub their noses as a sign that they were looking for gambling games. We also shouldn't forget that the Japanese word for nose is hana, which is also pronounced the same way as the word for flower. This is important to note because Hanafuda uses the kanji for flower because each of the individual cards that they would make would be covered in a different flower. Now you see how it ends up all coming back together nicely? Not gonna lie, I didn't expect just the name of Nintendo by itself to have so much backstory behind it. It definitely reflects the attention to detail that Nintendo likes to put into certain aspects of all of their work, even as a company who made playing cards in the late 80s. By the way, you should definitely take a shot for every single time I said the word cards in that last paragraph. While Nintendo had a pretty promising start, the company began to struggle financially since they were selling to a niche market, as well as the cards themselves having a pretty slow manufacturing process and were also fairly pricey at the time due to the high durability of the cards, which led to the replacement rate of said cards to be much slower than the average playing cards. So as a solution to this, they ultimately decided to begin producing a much cheaper and lower quality line of cards called Tengu. Sound familiar? They also began to offer products in cities like Osaka, where profits for game cards were much higher, and also put out their first Western style deck in 1907. However, that was shortly after the Russo-Japanese War that unfortunately created the playing cards tax, so in response to this, Nintendo entered into an agreement that same year with Nihon Senbai, also known as the Japan Tobacco, which allowed them to market their cards to cigarette stores throughout Japan. There was also a promotional calendar that was found from back in 1915 that indicated that the company name was actually changed to Yamauchi Nintendo and was branded as Marufuku Nintendo Corporated for the playing cards. Yamauchi decided that it was time to retire, so he adopted his son-in-law so that he could take over the business by adopting the Yamauchi surname in 1907, and became the second president of Nintendo in 1929. And Nintendo, which fortunately for our friend Sekiro Kaneda over here, was already the biggest playing card company in Japan by that point anyways. So a few years had passed by, and World War II caused Japanese authorities to limit the diffusion of foreign card games, and Japan's interest in recreational activities had also waned. Unfortunately, in 1950, Kaneda's health was beginning to deteriorate, so Hiroshi Yamauchi became the third president of Nintendo and changed the company name to Nintendo Playing Card Corporated Limited. I can't be the only one who finds that company name to be a little bit redundant, right? Anyways, I think some of the major advancements that was made in Hiroshi's presidency was that he centralized the production of cards in the Kyoto factories, which led to further expansion in offices across Japan. Not to mention, they also began issuing a new line of plastic cards, which garnered a decent amount of success in Japan as well. Now, this next detail sounds kind of insane given the context we know now about the companies involved in this, but according to the wiki, Nintendo themselves actually partnered with Walt Disney to include some of his popular animated characters into the cards. We also probably shouldn't forget that Nintendo had also begun developing a better distribution system in order to begin selling their products in toy stores as well. That's a little crazy to me though. That honestly does not sound anything like the corporate Disney that we know today, who is historically pretty strict with collaborating with other companies as well as copyright infringement of their properties and characters. I mean, come on now, these Kingdom Hearts fans can't even get a good night's sleep anymore because they have to still live in a timeline where Sora isn't in Smash. To me, I think it's pretty interesting looking back on Nintendo and how they used to operate as a company and seeing how they reacted to these different situations where the market changed and they kind of got hit with a left hook and they had to adapt. So far, we've covered a total of 2 instances where the environment and niche the company operates in were shaken up in a way that could have been potentially detrimental to the future of the company as a whole. This to me does not sound anything like the current corporate Nintendo that we know today, who at times does have the right intention in mind in making good games, but fails to adapt in the current market and recognizing their faults in general. They just seem to have a strong lack of self-awareness, but I think this problem in particular also lies in the fact that Nintendo as a company is set to a higher standard because of their previous history making quality games and still managing to adapt to current times and still managing to make a good profit in the meantime. All of that being said though, I'm not really here to discuss any current issues I have with Nintendo. I've already stated my opinion on them a couple times anyway, so I don't want to go into any further detail here about that. So the company began to experience a strong growth period across the board, but the Disney cards made it so that their primary market was children and caused the company's sales to be dependent on them. This situation was only made worse by the drop in revenue by the sales of the Hanafuda taking a nosedive, mostly thanks to the Japanese market beginning to censor around other hobbies like bowling and pachinko machines. Their stock price also began to plummet due to the Disney card sales also dropping, with their lowest stock price ever recorded right after the 1965 Tokyo Olympics at a mere 60 yen. That fact is pretty insane, especially considering that their current stock price in Japan as of the recording of this video is 63,390 yen, and was also named to be the richest company in Japan as of 2020, with their total net worth being 890.4 billion yen or $8.3 billion in the US. It's kind of funny to me how even back in the early 50s, Nintendo still had a strong knack for trying out random gimmicks and ideas and turning them into a product. For example, they had ventures into packages of instant rice, a chain of love hotels, and even a taxi service named Daya. Oh my god, playing Hotel Mario with that context is going to be so fucking awkward, isn't it? I bring this up mostly because there's a clear pattern of Nintendo investing into other avenues of business and trying out new ideas and having them be lost efforts, with some of the examples I mentioned earlier as prime examples of this behavior even back in the company's infancy. Okay, but can I be honest for a second? I definitely would have visited New York like fucking ages ago if there was like Nintendo taxi drivers going around. Dude, that would have been fucking sick. Okay, but can you just like imagine that for a second? The lights that are like on top of the taxi cars are like mushrooms, and inside the car they're like playing Nintendo music all the fucking time, and the taxi driver is like a toad? Dude, tell me that wouldn't be awesome. I fucking dare you. Although the taxi service was apparently received better than the other efforts, and Yamauchi unfortunately rejected the initiative after a series of disagreements with local unions. So around 1969, Yamauchi began to invest further into the development department directed by Hitoshi Amanishi, who had a long history with other areas of the company, and video game designer Gunpei Yokoi joined the department, who was responsible for coordinating a few different projects. He notably also had experience in manufacturing electronic devices, which led to Yamauchi to put him in charge of the company's game department. This is a point in time where Nintendo built a new production plant in Uji City just right outside of Kyoto, and they also began to distribute some tabletop games that you're probably familiar with: shogi, chess, mahjong, and Go, just to name a few. So fast forward to 1970, and this is a very pivotal landmark moment in the company's history, as Nintendo releases Japan's first ever electronic toy, the Nintendo Beam Gun, designed by none other than Masayuki Imura. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. About around 1 million units total were sold, and Nintendo began trading on the main section of the Osaka Stock Exchange and opened new headquarters. They also released other popular toys at the time, like the Ultra Hand, the Ultra Machine, the Ultra Scope, and the Love Tester, who were designed by our good friend Yokoi. Hold on, what was their obsession with the word Ultra? Did they just like think it was like really cool and like would drive up the sales? I don't know, this is kind of weird, but it's not like this is the last time Nintendo would indulge in this behavior anyways. Kind of like when Nintendo put the word super in front of everything during the SNES era, or like when they put the 64 like at the end of everything during the N64 era. Kind of weird. In case you're wondering what the Love Tester is, it's supposed to be like this device that was designed for young men and women that's supposed to determine how much two people love each other. Wait, how the fuck are you supposed to use this thing? Hold on. It says here that both users grab one of the connected spherical metal sensors with one hand and hold each other's hands with the other. Then the meter on the device oh my god, I can't read. Displays a scale between 1 and 100, which is supposed to be like their love score. I have no idea how this is supposed to work, but okay. However, a growing demand was beginning to spark for Nintendo's products, so Yamauchi acquired the surrounding land and assigned the production of cards to the original Nintendo building. Our good friend Yokoi also continued to develop products for the company, arguably one of the most notable ones being the laser clay shooting system, released in 1973 and actually somehow managed to surpass bowling in popularity. For those of you who don't know, the laser clay shooting system was a light gun shooting simulation, not too dissimilar from what you might see in an arcade, but the game consisted of an overhead projector that displays smoking targets behind a background in which the player would shoot with a rifle. Yeah, to me a pretty clear influence for what we now know as Duck Hunt, don't you agree? Unfortunately, Nintendo had lost billions of dollars due to the 1973 oil crisis that caused a spike in the cost of plastic and a change in consumer priorities that put important products necessary for everyday life rather than pastimes. In 1974, Nintendo had released Wild Gunman, which you may remember as a part of Duck Hunt's Final Smash, which is essentially just a laser clay shooting system except it was skeet shooting simulator instead of basic targets. Wild Gunman was also successfully brought to the US and Europe, but their production speed was still much lower than their rivals like Tommy and Bandai, not to mention their prices also being higher than their competitors. Yamauchi began to get inspired by the success of the Atari and other systems like it, so he acquired the Japanese distribution rights for the Magnavox Odyssey in 1974. He reached an agreement with Mitsubishi Electric to develop similar products between 1975 and 1978. They eventually developed the first official microprocessor for video game systems, the Color TV game series. During this period, the video game EVR Race was being developed, and our old pal Shigeru Miyamoto, aka the GOAT, joined Yokoi's team with the responsibility of designing the casing for the Color TV game consoles. Two major events happened in 1979, first being its American subsidiary opening in New York City, and a new department was created focused on the development of arcade games. And finally, in 1980, Nintendo's debut as a video game developer truly began with the release of the first ever video game handheld system, the Game & Watch, which was created using the technology from portable calculators. This system was a huge hit for Nintendo at the time, being one of their best-selling products at the time, with over 4.3 million units being sold worldwide during its production. But it wasn't until one game in particular that Nintendo truly began to hit their stride as a force to be reckoned with in the video game industry, and forever left its mark in history as one of the most innovative developers of all time. Nintendo had massive success in the realm of arcade games with the release of Donkey Kong, which was developed by our friend Shigeru Miyamoto and was one of the first video games that actually allowed the player's character to jump. The character you played as in Donkey Kong was an unknown character at the time by the name of Jumpman, who would go on to be one of the most popular fictional characters of all time, Mario. Fun fact, our boy Mario was actually named from Mario Segale, I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, the landlord of Nintendo's offices in Washington, and the rest is history. At this point, we all know what happens from here. Nintendo has been one of the most influential video game companies of all time and started what was the video game renaissance and defined what video games were and what they could be. Regardless of how they are perceived now, I don't think anyone can deny the sheer impact they have had to our culture as a whole, and I definitely think that achievement should be applauded. I mean, just think about it for a second. Name me a single person on the planet who doesn't know what a Super Mario is. It's pretty unlikely. Well, that's going to be doing it for today. I hope you enjoyed this history lesson, as it were. And before we wrap this up, I just want to say this. I mean, just look at them. Look at their resemblance. Tell me they don't look alike. She fill my mind up with ideas. I'm the highest in the room. Hope I make it out of this. She saw my eyes, she know I'm